No chewing. Hi guys, welcome back to Kristen is Fully Booked. I'm Kristen, and this is Poppy, and today I'm going to be sharing my Q2 stats for the quarter, and my standout books from the quarter, and a quick update on my reading goals. It is our first day of filming together, so bear with us as we figure out some kinks along the way. We'll see how long she lasts, but I wanted to take the time today to share all of my stats, my Q2 stats. It's coming out a little bit late. I've had a bunch of video obligations the past few weeks, so this is coming out a little bit later than I planned, but here it is. So for the second quarter of the year, I have read a total of 27 books. I had 4 DNFs, which is not bad. 27 I think is pretty on track with all of my goals, sort of numbers-wise, that I have casually mentioned here and there. I'm not really a numbers-based reader, so I'm not worried too much about reaching certain goals. I think on Goodreads I put maybe 90 books as the total for the year, and I think on Instagram somewhere I said that 104, like 2 books a week, sort of was my theoretical goal. I think I'm pretty much on track with that. Now, to get into the genre breakdown, we'll start with fantasy books. So I read 19 total fantasy books in this quarter, and that's 67%, which is perfect. That's pretty much on track with my, where I would like to be. I don't set a specific goal for that, but generally I want it to be about 2-to-1 fantasy books to everything else, and that is kind of exactly where we are this quarter. I did read 1 young adult fantasy book this quarter. I read 7 romance books, which is 26%, so about a quarter, which is I think a little bit down from last quarter, which is good. I'm sort of always with my romance books, I want them to be like high quality, that I enjoy them, and really great palate cleansers in between here and there for whenever I'm in the mood. I do have a breakdown for the romance books. I read 4 contemporary romance, 2 fantasy romance, and 1 paranormal romance. And then I had 1 sci-fi book this quarter as well. So overall, as I said, I'm quite satisfied, pretty happy with my genre breakdown for this quarter. Now, where and how was I reading all of these books? So I am primarily a library-based reader, and that is soft kisses. No. Now, where and how did I do all of this reading? So I am primarily a library-based reader, and I think that mostly shows in the stats this year, or this quarter, but I did read a lot of books on script as well. So breakdown on the numbers, I read 12 books using the library, which is about 44%. So this is actually a little bit down from the first quarter of the year. And I read 11 books using script, which is 41%. So that is, the script books are way up this quarter. That's because I was also reading a lot more audiobooks, which you will see in the numbers, and that's generally where I access a lot of them. Now, 3 of the books that I read this quarter I actually own, so I already had those as ebooks on my Kobo, and that is about 11%. And 2 of the books that I read were NetGalley e-arcs. Now, in terms of format, everything other than the audiobooks were all ebooks. I don't think I read any physical books this quarter. And of the audiobooks, that was 12. So again, 44% of what I read this past quarter was on audio. Now, I do keep track of how many books I buy as well. And this quarter, I only bought 1 book, but it wasn't actually a book that I read this quarter. It was a book that I read last year, and that was my new copy of This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone. So there was no impulse purchasing of books this quarter, which I am quite pleased about. I'm actually really excited about the huge increase in audiobooks. I feel like I am hitting my stride a little bit with audiobooks since moving, which was in May. So most of the way, 2/3 of this quarter has been in my new location, and I've just really been focusing on having better habits in my life, like better scheduling and structure, and the audiobook listening has really opened up my ability to keep reading at sort of the quantity that I was at while still managing all of those things that I want to do and accomplish outside of reading. Do you want it down? Okay, we've relocated to the dog bed. So now I'm going to do the series update. So not necessarily the series that I have and have not started or all of those things, but more just numbers-based series that I've started, finished, and continuing on with. So I started 8 series this quarter, which is it's a fairly high number. And then I only finished 2 series this quarter, which is quite low and a huge disparity between how many series I started and how many I finished. However, I don't feel too badly about that because I also read 8 books that were a continuation of a series. So it's not like I'm not working on the series that I have on the go. I'm just also starting a lot of series. Now this is a little bit tough because sometimes I'm reading things as like a buddy read or a book club, and I don't always plan to start a new series. It's more just like that book is the book that is what is being read. So I don't always have control of that, but it is something that I'm thinking about moving into the second half of the year, really being cognizant of like, what series do I have on the go right now? What series am I really enjoying? And where do I want to put my time and energy for series like leading into the end of 2022? And then I also read 9 standalones this quarter. I do always have some miscellaneous stats that I like to share. So first of which is rereads. Only 3 of the books that I read this quarter were rereads. And this is part of my realm of the elderlings, like reread / new read, depending on what series I am in. So this was both the last 2 books in the Farseer, Royal Assassin and Assassin's Quest, and then the first book in Tawny Man, which is Fool's Errand. I read 8 new releases this quarter, which is way up from the first quarter of the year. I think I only read 2 maybe in the first quarter, and this quarter I fortunately was able to prioritize a lot of new releases that I have had my eye on. A lot of them were anticipated releases for me. There definitely are a lot of new releases that I really have my eye on in the second half of the year. So I think that this number will continue to stay like higher than it was in the first quarter, but I'm not sure if it's going to be like everything that I pick up, again, based on the fact that I was also trying to prioritize wrapping up series in the second half of the year. So those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand unless it is a new release that finishes a series, which is the case in a couple of the books that I'm anticipating. And then I also share my ratings average in this like miscellaneous section. And for this quarter, it is 3.5, which is like kind of how I'm feeling. I feel like that is representative of what I felt or how I feel about this year and this quarter in particular. I think it was 3.6 last quarter, so it's not a huge deviation from where I was at. Although I will say I think I had way more 2-star books this quarter than I did in the first quarter. I did not give out any 5-star books this quarter, which is pretty disappointing, but I will say that I do know that I am very stingy with the 5 stars that I get out, and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, just based on how much more I know about ratings and how that affects, the authors. And from a like supporting authors perspective, I am aware that me being so particular about a 5-star being like a new all-time favorite is not what a 5-star is supposed to mean. So I am like not going to drastically change what I do right away, but I am currently thinking about changing up the way that I personally think about when I like rate books. Now, towards the last half of last year, I made a video with some of my reading goals for this year. A lot of it was more habit and like structure and stuff like that, not necessarily like numbers or breakdown or anything like that, but just generally like how I want my habit and life to be around with books. And I thought I would give a little bit of an update for you on that. So one of the goals that I had that I mentioned in that video was to be more intentional with the books that I was picking up. I feel like last year, while I did have like some absolute new favorite books, there was so much last year, like quantity wise, that it was just So this year I was really focusing on priority, not necessarily like making a TBR every month, but I did switch my Radar Reads video, which originally were just like, hey, these are the books that I have on my mind right now because people keep talking about them or they just came out or whatever, to something that is a little bit more of an intentional, somewhat priority list for the season. Another habit-based goal that I had was to put in some boundaries about when and where I was reading. Last year, I really struggled with reading like super late into the night. I was also spending a lot of time in the middle of the day when I should have been doing work or other things for my life and schedule and like all of those things. I was spending just lying on the couch reading. Like I would get up in the morning, have breakfast and tea, and just like read on the couch for hours. So I really wanted to put in some more boundaries. I had 2 specific ideas for that, and one was to have a cutoff limit of midnight, that I wasn't allowed to read past midnight. I will say that definitely has not fully happened, but with my move in May, my partner and I have been focusing a lot more on like structure and schedule and habit forming and things like that in our new place. And so this has gone so much better because our life has changed a lot with just what we're doing and what we're up to and responsibilities and things like that. So since moving, this has absolutely improved, but really only up until only since May, it has gotten closer to the midnight range. I would say it's usually right now, or at least pre-Poppy, it was in the 12 to max 1 a.m. range. The other specific kind of habit that I was hoping to include to work towards that reading goal was to listen to audiobooks specifically in the morning to kind of prevent myself from not doing anything all morning and just reading all morning long and kind of wasting away the day. My thought was that I would put on an audiobook and go about the house, like tidying up and doing housework and things like that, like setting up my day on a positive note. And what I have not exactly been doing that, but I will say that I've discovered it's almost the opposite. So I'm listening to audiobooks while doing housework, which is really great. I'm just doing it more in the evening and not necessarily in the morning. And the final habit that I will mention was that I wanted to get a better system of note-taking so that I could, more effectively share my thoughts and feelings and make more list videos and things like that, rather than just scrolling through the list of books that I've read and being like, what books feel like this? So I will say that I have started to work on this year, specifically with like the keywords that I've shared in my recent reads. I will say that this is already starting to slip, where I've noticed that in the first half of the year, like in the first quarter of the year, maybe I did that immediately after finishing a book, and in the second quarter of the year, I was not. And so then it's harder after the fact to think of those keywords. So this was a really good reminder again that like, no, this is a goal. I need to work on this note-taking thing and go on from there. Okay, just to swing back to some stats, going back to the was I intentional in my reading this quarter? There's two different ways that I keep track of this. One is the priority series, and the other is my radar reads that I create for each season, and whether or not I was reading all of those books when it came down to it. So in my radar reads video for the spring season or second quarter, I talked about 21 books, and of those 21 books, I read 14. So this is 67%, or roughly 67%, or 2/3, which I think is okay. I don't remember how that compares to the first quarter of the year, so I will put up the comparison numbers there for you so you can see. But I will say that I do feel like I was using the radar reads this past quarter to guide what I was reading. So some of the books that I didn't read have like a, star or asterisk next to them, one of which, for example, was a DNF. So I tried to read it, turns out wasn't working for me. 2 of the books are still on hold at the library. I have not been able to get access to them, so it's outside of my control. One of the books I'm reading in July for the Kingfisher Readathon right now. So that was a book that I had planned to read that season, and then I found out about this readathon, and I postponed it for July. I also have another book that I postponed for August, and another one that I think I will probably wait until the fall to read, based on wanting to read it around the same time as one of my friends. And then, as I mentioned, I also think about my priority series here when I'm thinking about how intentional I have been. As I said already, I have read 2 this quarter, and that puts me at 5 out of 11 for the year, which I think is pretty okay. It's not like I'm behind. I am on track to finish that. Those are all of the stats that I wanted to share and include, and my reading goals update for you today. I will also share some of my standout books from this quarter. Now, this year I'm not doing quarterly favorites, and that's because I am really weird about the word favorite. Unless a book is a new actual favorite book, I have trouble ascribing the term quarterly favorite to it. And based on how my year is going this year, or how my reading is going this year, I don't really feel comfortable saying the word favorite about the majority of what I'm reading, which is unfortunate. So I'm just saying standout. I actually have 8, not 5. I think when I originally wrote these down, I put some as honorable mentions, but you know what? I wasn't confident on the ranking of them at the time, which ones were standouts and which ones were honorable mentions, so I'm just gonna give you all 8. One of the ones that is definitely a standout is Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell. I absolutely loved this book. I know that it has some flaws, and I talked about them a little bit when I did my recent reads, but I will say it's one of those ones where you're you love it in spite of all the flaws, where you're yeah, I can see that this and this and this is a bit of a problem, or this didn't work for some people, and I totally get that, but I actually still really, really enjoyed it. I listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook experience was just so wonderful. I laughed, I cried, I can't wait to read the next book, and the only reason that I haven't read the next book in that series is because my own library only has an ebook copy, and I can't quite let go of the idea of not hearing Falkio's voice telling me this story. So despite the fact that it's always described as this fun, swashbuckling, Three Musketeer-esque type of setup, I would say it was a lot more emotional. There were definitely some fun bits. There was definitely a scene that I was not super on board with, but overall I just had such a fabulous experience with that. I would say that this one is probably the closest to the turn favorite. Another standout book was The Golem and the Genie by Helene Wecker. I can't believe I didn't read this book sooner. I had it on hold at Scribd or on Scribd for since last year sometime. This is about a golem and a genie meeting in New York City at the turn of the century. The two are so different from each other. They're really the only thing that the two have in common is that they are both trying to pass as being human in this setting. They're part of different communities where they are. The way that it is written with all of the POVs that are included, which isn't just limited to the Golem and the Genie, there are several others as well, gave me this really unique sense of like an almost bird's eye view scope of these particular communities in New York City at this time period. I was totally okay with the idea that they might not all tie up. Like even if it hadn't, which they did at some point, all the POVs came together, but even if they didn't, I was so on board with getting this like bird's eye view of what these communities were like, what the experience of being here in this community at this time in this city was like. I absolutely loved it. I loved how distinct and individual the Golem and the Genie were, so clearly so different from each other in how they thought about everything, really, it seemed, but they had that kind of common link that I really appreciated and that came through really in a unique way that I wasn't particularly expecting. Another standout book from this quarter was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book was just so on point for aesthetic. It's not an aesthetic that I particularly go for all that often, but it was done so masterfully that I couldn't help but absolutely appreciate and be overwhelmed by how on point it was. It built atmosphere so well through the like sights and sounds and smells and the aesthetic of the circus and of the people surrounding the Night Circus. I particularly loved the second person perspective snippets. There were like really small little snippets throughout the book that were as if it was you experiencing various attractions in the circus, and I almost think that there should have been more of that. They were some of my favorite parts, but I did really enjoy the history and like the building of how this circus came to be, along with the magical competition that is going on. Another standout book from the quarter has got to be Skullsworn by Brian Staveley. This is a bit of a surprise for me. I picked this up as part of my Assassins in April Readathon. It is a companion book in the world of the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne, and it almost reads like a fantasy romance while not exactly being a fantasy romance. It is about an assassin who, in order to like pass her, like to officially become a priestess within her, you know, assassin religion, whatever, she has to kill certain people. One of those people is to kill someone that she's loved. Unfortunately, she's never loved anyone before, so she has to go out, fall in love with someone intentionally so that she can then kill them. And I really liked that setup. The main character, Pyrrha, I think was her name, is definitely my kind of assassin, where it's like someone who's like uber skilled and trained. I really like that style of assassin. I just think it's so much more fun than like fumbling assassins. And I knew that there was going to be some sort of twist, like it couldn't just be as straightforward as exactly what it sounds like. I knew there was going to be something, but the way that the twist happened, actually, I really appreciated. It was also so much more lush and atmospheric with this like kind of swampy island, kind of grimy city that they were in. And it was just like the writing was so lush, and you could really get a sense of this particular setting, and it fit the tone of the book so well. Another standout book from the quarter was The Discord of Gods by Jen Lyons. This is the fifth and final book in the A Chorus of Dragons series, and you know what? Just like great ending of a series. It's not necessarily a standout, amazing book on its own, but because it was the conclusion that wrapped up a whole new, like, definitely new all-time favorite series for me. I think I'm like, have been thinking about it enough since I finished that I can comfortably and confidently say that's a new all-time favorite. It had the most straightforward narrative framing that was just sort of like time happening in one direction. So that was really great. It was a culmination of all of the various POVs and characters that we've met along the way in the previous 4 books. Just like, okay, coming together, gang's all here, let's do this. And there was even almost like a heist-like approach to solving the like world problem that we have been leading up to, and you were jumping around from head to head in getting like how various parts of the plan were going. So that was really, really fun. I don't really have anything else to say about that book. Like, it does have some flaws. I wish we got a little bit more time with certain characters and, you know, more scenes with a particular romantic coupling, but it is what it is. It was a great ending to a fabulous series. 3 more to go. Another standout book for me was The Black Coast by Mike Brooks. I think that my expectations were a little bit too high going into this one, just based on how much Maria from the channel Maria Might Read That, how much she loved that. I think I was like really nervously excited and expecting that to be a little bit of a better book for me, but I think it had such interesting, like a new kind of modern take on what felt like a very classic fantasy kind of a setup or setting and tone, but with this like modern twist with some of the cultural representation that was happening. I really liked the differences in the cultures and how the two sort of clashed in various ways. The one thing that didn't particularly really work for me was just that we only ever felt like it was getting that from these two perspectives in particular, but that made sense because there was like a language barrier here, so it made sense that it was always those two who had a shared language in common who were discussing the issues that were arising. But I definitely really enjoyed it. I did give this like a pretty good rating, you know, in my own on Goodreads, that sort of thing. So definitely a standout book, if not a new favorite. I also think that Royal Assassin was a standout book. This is the second book in the Farseer series. It was a reread for me. It was just so wonderful. There's something so cozy about the Six Duchies, like being in the Six Duchies in Fitz's head, even though like it's very emotional up and down with what is going on in Fitz's life at various things. And there's definitely a lot of highs and lows throughout Royal Assassin. He makes a lot of mistakes. He has a lot of wins. It's a really, really interesting mix at a very interesting political time period and a stage in Fitz's life. I really felt like there was this distinct difference between the first half, which felt very cozy and just like getting back in with Fitz, figuring out his life, like back at Buckkeep Castle, what's going on, whereas the second half of the book was very stressful and you felt like you were already on defense and that Fitz was behind and you couldn't quite figure out why the villain was so on top of things in the way that he was. And yeah, it was just a very distinct, cozy, and stressful experience. And then finally, the last standout book from the quarter I absolutely have to mention is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. Just such a fun read. It is this really interesting, like almost YA, maybe middle grade Disney Pixar-esque kind of like quality of a book where it's fun and lighthearted, but still a little bit like touching on some challenging or uncomfortable or more, you know, sadder concepts, but it does so in a way that's really approachable to young readers, but still with some jokes that you know adults would get as well. Kind of like I said, like a Disney Pixar movie. And T. Kingfisher's ability to write what that was in such an effective way that had me laughing out loud and then had me very thoughtful and thinking about like this 14-year-old girl who has to save the city. And why is it that this 14-year-old girl, with all of the adults responsible for the city, why is it on her shoulders to save the city? And I liked that it really explored that idea, almost, you know, holding up a mirror to your standard YA book or other lots of fantasy books where things really do seem to rest on particularly young shoulders. And she was really kind of holding up a mirror to that and saying, yes, why is that? Why is that the case? What has happened here? I'm seeing this as well in the books that I'm reading currently, where it feels like T. Kingfisher is saying, like, a lot of other authors are doing this, and so I'm going to do the opposite and question why that is the case. So absolutely, she won me over on that book, especially with the militant gingerbread companion and the carnivorous sourdough starter named Bob. Just absolutely loved that book so much. It was so cute. I can't wait to reread that in the future. Okay, well that is it. That is my second quarter of the year. Well, the stats, a reading goal update for you, as well as some of my standout books from this past quarter. Let me know how the last quarter has been for you. Are you on track with your reading goals for the year? Do you make reading goals? And if there are any standout books from this past quarter that you want to share with me, let me know down below. I would love to hear from you guys. That is it. I will see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye.